In this video, what we're going to be doing is going over correlation and continuing on with the overview that you had. This is the file that you see here is a file we're going to play with, and it's looking at, say, NBA teams. And it's looking at the various teams. What are the value? In other words, if you're going to sell it, how much might you get for it? And then what's the yearly revenue that they might be getting? And you're trying to figure out, you're asking, is there a relationship between the value of the team and the revenue that they actually pull in? And so what you're trying to do is identify that correlation. In other words, it's a measure of strength of the relationship between the two variables. Now, a positive correlation is basically saying that one moves up, the other one moves up also. If one moves down, the other one moves down, as far as a measure is concerned. A negative correlation is basically saying if it goes up, one goes up, the other goes down. Correlation goes from -1 to +1. In other words, +1 is a perfect correlation. They move perfectly together. A -1 is a negative correlation, perfectly negative. In other words, if one goes up one, the other one goes down one, perfectly. Now, something to remember, correlation does not mean causation. Many times we will identify several things that kind of move together. We're trying to figure out if this relates to that. And you may see a positive correlation. It does not mean that one causes the other. So you always have to keep that in mind whenever you start thinking about correlation. In identifying what the correlation is in a problem using Excel, again, what you're going to be doing is using the data analysis piece. So we're trying to figure out, we're asking, is there a correlation? Is there a relationship between revenue and value of the team? And so what we're going to do is we're going to go to our data analysis. And what we want is correlation. Click on OK. The input range. What we're doing is we're looking at value and revenue. So what we're going to do is identify these things here. Okay. And we do have labels in the first row. And our output range. What we're going to do is we're going to put our output range, we're going to say we're going to put that into G3. All right. Click on OK. And you can see that what this is saying here is the correlation between value and revenue for the various teams is 0.97. So it's real close to 1. So it's a real close correlation between the value of the teams and the revenue. Now, to show you how things can change, let's say that Boston, I'm just going to throw in a bunch of different numbers here, much lower than what is actually there. And so what we're going to do now is see what the correlation is with this. So we'll identify this stuff here. Okay. And we're going to go to our data analysis. We want correlation. We're going to say, okay, that's our input range. Our output range, we're going to put it down into G7. Okay. Now you can see that because of those changes that we made, the correlation is almost zero. There's almost no correlation between the two, between value and revenue, based on the things that we put in there. So in other words, with these changes here, it's saying that there's not much of a relationship between the value and the revenue. Now, one of the questions that the practice problems is going to ask is what percentage of the variability, in other words, how it's varying between these two things, is accounted for by this correlation, all right, by the relationship between the two variables. How much of the variance that you're getting there is based on that. What you do is you just take this number here and square it. So if I take equals this, and then I square it, there's a little hat, and then the 2. So 95% of the variation is accounted for is between the two variables. So in the practice problems, it's going to ask you to identify the correlation. That's how you go about doing it. You go to your data analysis, you go to correlation, you identify your data set, and it'll tell you what the correlation is. The closer to 1, the stronger the correlation. The closer to 0, the fewer the correlation. To identify the percent of variability that's identified by this, what you do is you take that correlation number and square it. So those are the key points for this chapter, for this aspect. Give me a shout if you have questions.